All right, well, good morning. Welcome to CIP season. We have a full day of agency briefings for you, but before we get...
Can't hear you very well. Is the mic?
It is on, but maybe I have to be
A little
closer.
There you go.
We have, a full day of agency briefings for you. But before we get started, we're going to do an introductory presentation from the Department of Finance and the Department of Planning. But before we get started, I think Director Keene wanted to say some opening words, and then we'll go ahead and
Thank you, Sarah. Just for me, real quick, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, as we get started with a couple of days of presentations on the capital improvement plan, I just wanted to acknowledge the challenge Baltimore faces when it comes to the scale of investment needed in things like streets and utilities and parks, and yet the limited resources we have at our disposal for these things. Therefore, we know that our process for planning investments in these things must continually get better and be more impactful. It's essential that our efforts are coordinated across agencies so the investments we make reinforce what we are committed to as a city. Things like neighborhood revitalization, downtown vitality, more transportation options for more people, and so forth. Therefore, we're committed in 2026 to the Department of Planning advancing coordination across agencies on the city we are seeking to build. This in no way diminishes our need to repair and maintain the infrastructure we have. It will just seek to ensure our goals are as deeply embedded in the CIP as they possibly can be. I mention this because I came to Baltimore as planning director a few months ago. When this current CIP process was underway, I do see ways we can, as you would expect with any process like this, we can do better. And it means that we will need to start earlier and have more coordination among all the agency partners. That is our commitment for the CIP process this coming year. Regarding where we are now with this process, as Sarah said, Laura Larson will start, Sarah as well will be leading off on our CIP presentations for this year. We're lucky to have them, actually, and their professionalism, talent, expertise helping lead this important work for Baltimore. We have today's agency presentations, and then we'll conclude agency presentations next Thursday. So with that, Sarah, if you want to get started.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Laura Larson, who is the budget director for the city. We feel it's important as we begin the presentation for the capital budget to anchor that in an understanding for the commission and the public of the city's overall fiscal position. So she'll provide that context, and I think is happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. And I apologize, that was not mic on, but go ahead.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Laura Larson, I'm the city's budget director, and I'm very happy to be with you all here again today. In my role, work very closely with colleagues here in the planning department to make sure that we're providing adequate, which to the director's point, we've been falling below that standard for many years, but really focusing on how we can do more and more in terms of the capital space. So what I want to do today is I want, as you begin your conversation with city agencies about their capital needs and their plans for fiscal 27, I want to anchor that in terms of what the city is facing overall as we enter the upcoming fiscal year. But before we get into the specifics of what the city's up against for our financial outlook for next year, I want to talk a little bit about the 10-year financial plan and what it means for the capital budget. So last year when I came before the Planning Commission, the 10-year plan was in draft form, and we talked a little bit about some of the goals that we were working towards as we think about the next plan. Well, the mayor released the updated 10-year plan back in December. This is the city's second 10-year plan, and really our focus when we think about really long-range financial planning like that is how we move major financial goals that cross fiscal years and how we think about these strategies in tandem. I think the other thing about the 10-year financial plan is that frequently people can think about these things as savings or ways to cut. But what we're doing here with this plan is we're thinking about how we optimize our revenue and how we make really strategic investments as part of the city's overall budget. And so that's why you see the plan oriented around three cornerstones: core city service delivery, infrastructure investment, and tax competitiveness. And in the plan, when we think about each of those different cornerstones, we understand that we have to do those things in tandem. We have to make our services better so that we're meeting the expectations of our residents. We have to improve our infrastructure so that it's easier for people to get around our city and access city services. And we have to ensure that we have competitive tax rates so that we're not at a strategic disadvantage when we think about our neighbors or other jurisdictions that we compete against. So I want to double click here for a couple minutes into what this means for infrastructure investment. So this slide here is looking back at locally backed capital sources going back to fiscal 2010. And so the dark line that you see on this chart, that's our GEO borrowing that we, the authorization that we get from our voters for the debt that we issue for the capital budget. The yellow line that has a lot of volatility up and down is our pay-as-you-go capital, and that's essentially the general fund cash that we identify in any given budget year in order to support the budget. And the green line at the bottom, those are county transportation bonds, and that's the instrument that we were using in the 2010s into 2023 to replace highway user revenue that had been cut at the state level. So this slide tells us that we've made a lot of progress on the funding side in the last 2 fiscal years when we look at how rapidly that investment has gone up. Fiscal 26 is the 4th time that we've seen GEO borrowing increased since fiscal 11. In the current fiscal year budget, we authorized $125 million in borrowing for these projects. And that's part of our multi-year step up in order to get to $200 million. We've also seen that in fiscal 25 and in 26, we've had additional pay-as-you-go capital. Part of that is from highway user revenue. So in fiscal 26, we're investing almost $95 million from highway user revenue directly into transportation's capital program. That's the one of the largest numbers that we've ever seen in terms of HUR for capital. But we've also been able to supplement that through general fund surpluses that we've been able to accumulate and invest back into the capital budget. So as we think about where we're going over the next 10 years, we will continue to focus on how we grow the capital budget, but also focus on how we improve how we deliver capital projects and how we budget for capital projects. And a number of the policy changes that Sarah and her team have been leading are really important to that. And one of the things that is most important is that we start to fund full projects. So we fund design in its entirety and we fund construction in its entirety so that we move away from really dividing up the dollars and trying to accumulate appropriation over time. And that's really important because we know that when it comes to these capital projects, we get the best price for our projects when we do them today. And so by taking the strategy of accumulating money over a 5 or 6 year period, all we're doing is we're diluting the purchasing power of our capital budget. And so these strategies in terms of how we think about budgeting differently, how we think about delivering projects differently, and how we are really laser focused on making sure that we identify more, sustain this increase in funding, all those strategies are important to work together in terms of really making meaningful progress on the city's deferred maintenance backlog. So when we look out to the next 10 years, this chart, the yellow portion on this chart is showing the increased capital spending that is planned between out to 2025 or 2035, excuse me. And so there's really 2 strategies that are embedded here that make up the bulk of that increase. The first is getting to the $200 million borrowing level and being able to sustain that year over year. And then also working with our state partners in order to secure the higher HUR revenue that is set to expire in the coming fiscal years. As I mentioned, in fiscal 27, some of the key investments that we're seeing from the plan as it would relate to capital is the second year of the increase in GEO borrowing at $125 million. We're also looking to continue to invest reimbursements that the city received as part of its COVID-19 expenses back into the capital program. And this is the first year that as part of the budget, we're funding the non-contiguous TIF that's focused on the mayor's vacancy reduction strategy. If we look out to those out years, as I mentioned, we're focused on HUR restoration, working with the state around the convention center modernization project and supporting the work of that state task force. And then also looking at our city assets and looking at how we can assess the overall footprint of the city and look at how we can make sure that we're optimizing that in order to be able to make the right capital investments.
Laura, do you mind if I ask, is it easier if I ask you along the way?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
And the same for others, if you feel, I think it's intended to be relatively informal, so we can at least have talk about these things. The vacancy strategy, when you say, this will all come up in the agency presentations, but I'm sure you can cover them a little bit. Is that non-contiguous TIF funds, meaning the proceeds of the bond issuance that I understand has just been done, or other capital funds associated with the vacancy initiative overall?
So in the fiscal 27 budget, we, on the operating side, we're budgeting the first year of debt service for the bonds that have recently been issued for the non-contiguous TIF. And that'll be about $7 million a year in debt service based off of the first issuance that was completed last month.
Is the use of the TIF funds a capital or an operating, not the debt service, but the use of the funds?
So those funds will no, they're not a capital expense. They would be, they're essentially being managed separately by HCD. The way that we'll see this live in the budget is in terms of how we assume the revenue that's coming back in from those rehabbed properties, as well as how we assume the debt service for the payments to repay the bonds.
Yeah, at some point, and I put a pin in this, I say to the director and perhaps to others in the department, to Sarah, I think the commission would benefit from an updated overall presentation on the vacancy strategy and its funding, just so we can understand that it's certainly not today or in this sequence, but if we can, because I think it's now mature. I've been trying to delay that until it's mature enough not to be a total moving target.
Yep.
But as the target stops moving, it would be helpful. My other question on this slide is, well, two other questions. And again, we might get to these in a different context, so feel free to defer. On HUR, can you supply us with a schedule of how the city is using its current allocation of HUR funds? And as I understand it, some of them are going to operating costs because it's lawful to do so.
That's correct.
You're obviously, I understand that you're struggling to, fill holes a little bit of an. Sorry. It's not really
With the HUR.
literally and figuratively. But I think it's, there is, and the mayor has in his legislative priorities, as you know, the extension of HUR. It might be worth a moment, if you're familiar with it, to tell the commission. If not, I might be able to do it, about the HUR cliff. Yep. That is being faced and why it's so important for this session. So there's two things. One is the overall HUR initiative at the state level and how it would affect the city, or if it happens or doesn't happen. The other would be, whatever that outcome is, how does the city use its HUR funds? I was surprised when I looked at the statute to see that the city has, and I think it's like the city and Kent County, it's a very weird provision, has additional flexibility to use its HUR funds beyond what sort of baseline HUR eligible sources are. And then when I saw several years ago a list of the HUR funds and the way they were deployed, I was surprised at the list. Not critical of it, because I understand those are all valid expenses, but I was surprised at how broad their applicability was versus what I had originally thought was like, oh, HUR, I think I know what that's supposed to be used for.
Yeah.
So it'd be useful if you could just educate us,
Yep.
whether it's today or next week or along the way, or if Sarah could
Yeah.
really get up to speed on the whole HUR picture.
Yeah, and I can give you some initial thoughts, and if folks have additional questions, we have a lot of material about HUR. Because to your point, Mr. Chair, this is one of the city's utmost priorities going into the session. So, in fiscal 26 and 27, it's the maximum increase that we're receiving over this 5-year step up in HUR that was granted by the General Assembly back in fiscal 22. And so in fiscal 26, we've assumed that the city will receive about $272 million in HUR revenue, and $95 million of that is going to the capital budget. The balance of that is going to support various eligible operating costs, and so that would include a variety of services that are performed by the Department of Transportation. It also includes a handful of services in the Department of Public Works, mainly around their public right-of-way cleaning, and then traffic enforcement that's performed by the city's police department. One thing that's important to note is that in this period, while HUR funds have been stepped up, we have not been diverting additional HUR revenue to fill holes or to cover gaps on the operating side. We have been using a portion of the HUR to sort of take care of some of the inflationary increases year over year. Operating costs grow, as staff get COLAs, as as benefit costs grow, that sort of thing. And so the way that we've been approaching the HUR increase is that a portion of it is used to cover some of those inflationary costs in the operating service, but we're working to maximize the additional dollars that go to the capital budget. In fact, what we saw in the fiscal 25 budget is that there was actually a significant surplus as we moved through the year, where their DOT had underspent its budget, and we were able to turn around and appropriate some of those funds as additional capital dollars. And so we've really been kind of laser focused in terms of making sure that we're getting the maximum amount of money to those capital projects. I think now where it's really important is making sure that those projects get into design and get into construction and get across the finish line, so that we can demonstrate, as we advocate at the state level, we can demonstrate how we've been strong stewards of those dollars. The one other point that you had mentioned is the flexibilities that the city has compared to some of the other jurisdictions in Maryland. Part of the reason for that is that the city's road network existed or predated the state's highway network. And so because of that, the city is responsible for maintaining all of its roadways, even if it's a state highway. And that's different than the other jurisdictions in the state, where the state is responsible for maintaining their roadways. And so what that means is there's additional burden on the city, which, prior to the cut coming out of the Great Recession, that was why we had a higher allocation. And so as we advocate currently in Annapolis, we have to sort of think about the fact that we have a broader set of assets that we're trying to take care of, and where it makes us a little bit different than some of the peer jurisdictions across the state.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to go down too far down an HUR rabbit hole, but it is pretty critical. I mean, did you say that only 95 of 220-something million is going to capital and the balance is going to operating?
In fiscal 26, it's 95 for 95 million out of the 271 is going to capital.
Right. So, look, I don't have any doubt that it's lawful, and I don't have any doubt that the money going to operating is being spent on good operating costs. I mean, I'm not being critical, but I'm just concerned that, considering the capital needs, particularly the condition of the roads, which is what most people think of as like numero uno HUR purpose, to make sure that it's getting sufficient HUR capital fund or sufficient HUR funds for that purpose. And the temptation is to continue to use it for other purposes. And again, they're totally legitimate purposes. But I'd just like to understand better how that decision gets made and whether it is affecting our ability to manage the the road repair, repaving, not repair, I guess, because that's not capital, but the more significant costs. Is that a reasonable kind of framework?
Certainly, and it's all about trade-offs. And so if the decision is ultimately, what I think Director Macbeth from Transportation would tell you is that in order to deliver these capital projects, she has to have a strong team in place in order to manage the operations of the department. And so if we want to go down a path of saying we don't want to use HUR for those operating costs, that's going to put additional pressure over on the operating budget, and it's going to just result in other choices. So there would be other trade-offs that we would have to make as we look to replace those HUR dollars with another source of general fund revenue.
Right. I mean, the problem is there's not enough money.
That
But-
is correct.
So, like I said, it's not a criticism. It's more of an analytical question. So at some point, I think it would be helpful for the commission, particularly as we're going into the session when HUR is a top priority for the mayor and for many, many others, to really get a clear picture of both how it gets here and what we do with it once it arrives.
Certainly, and I will take that as a follow-up and coordinate with Sarah and Director Keene and the Mayor's Office of Government Relations that as the advocacy is taking place down in Annapolis, that we come back before this body to give you updates on those materials that we're sharing down in Annapolis.
Thank you. And if I might, my last question on this slide on the convention center, and I saw the DGS materials, I know they're coming, but does the city have 100, I know there's a state contribution, but that's just a contribution. In terms of actual work, the city owns and has 100% of the capital need responsibilities and obligations at the convention center. Is that correct?
Under the current agreement with
Yeah.
the state and the Stadium Authority, yes, those the convention center would fall under the umbrella of the facilities management team in the Department of General Services.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So with that frame in terms of where we're going with capital, and I think I would just share the sentiments of everyone in this room that, one of the top priorities that I believe is a major risk for the city of Baltimore is the lack of funding in capital. Not funding the capital budget just creates problems in the operating budget when we have to deal with things as more costly emergency repairs. We saw that with the police headquarters garage repair. And so share the goal of all of you and everyone in this room in terms of working to sustain these numbers at a higher level as we move forward. So with that, I just want to give you a sense of what the city is facing as we prepare to really dig in and do our deep work on the fiscal 27 budget. When we look at our revenues versus expenditures based off of our forecast from this fall, revenue was projected to grow by about $52 million or 2%, while our expenditures were projected to grow by almost $99 million or just under 4%. So resulting in a budget gap of just under $47 million. Now, one of the things that I think is important to look at these numbers is we have to exclude the use of one-time fund balance that was part of the FY26 budget. So in fiscal 26, we appropriated $54 million from the city's fund balance in order to support largely one-time capital-related expenditures. So if we look at our growth numbers year over year without that fund balance, our revenue is actually growing by over $106 million or 4%, which is pretty strong in an uncertain economy that we find ourselves in. But our expenditures on the other hand, are growing by about $140.2 million or 5.7%. When we look at how these numbers compare to a year ago when we were doing the FY26 budget, the revenue growth is consistent with what we were seeing a year ago, about 4%. But what we've been able to make some progress on is slowing our expenditure growth. So a year ago we were at 9%, this year we're at just under 6%. A couple of major factors that are driving this is on the revenue side, we're seeing a leveling off in terms of our property tax growth, and that's because for the last couple of years, based off of how the triennial audits work, we've really been experiencing the benefits of the strong real estate market coming out of the COVID pandemic. But now as that market has cooled, that growth is starting to level off. We also continue to see strong income tax revenue disbursements from the state, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. We are also seeing sort of a stabilizing in terms of some of our wage pressure, but we have to annualize the wage increases from our most recent union contracts, which is really focused on increasing wages for some of the lowest paid employees in the city's workforce. So this slide just shows some of our high-level revenue increase assumptions. I just want to note this is based off of our work that was completed this fall. We're currently updating all of these projections based on updated information that has become available over the last 3 to 4 weeks. So as I mentioned, property tax is essentially leveling off, but we still are seeing about 5.5% growth. That's driven by an assumed increase of about 9.2% growth on the residential side and essentially no growth on the commercial side. For transfer and recordation taxes, we're assuming that there is limited to no growth in real estate activity. We've actually seen in fiscal 26, the number of transactions has continued to trend downward compared to prior years, but the value of the transactions continues to grow. On the income tax side, we're projecting a 6% increase, and this assumes about a 3.8% increase in per capita income. HUR is projected to decline by about 1%. I do want to note that in fiscal 27, we'll receive the same share of the statewide HUR allocation that we're receiving in FY 26. That's 12.2%. That's the second of 2 years of the max allocation that we are receiving over that 5-year period. The reason why we're seeing a small decline there is because statewide HUR revenue is trending downward, and that's driven by the ongoing downward trend in gas tax revenue, as well as titling and registration revenue that they're receiving. Interest earnings are projected to decline by about 35%. This was an expected decline because over the last 5 years or so, the city's been able to include cash that we had received as part of the ARPA award coming out of COVID as part of our short-term investments. And the spend down period for all of those ARPA dollars is December of this year. And so that reduction reflects just that we're going to have less cash on hand, but that was a known item. And then some other notable adjustments. We have, as part of the 26 budget, the mayor proposed updating and revisiting a number of fees that the city has on its books. Many of those had not been updated since the 2000s, and so we're currently in the process of bringing those updates through the Board of Estimates and City Council for approval. We're also seeing that there's a slight uptick in the cost of tax credits based off of increased costs for a number of projects. And we're not assuming the use of any fund balance next year. So that all comes together for just a modest decline.
Laura, before you go, did you say, sorry again, on the HUR a moment ago, did you talk about the cliff, or just, did we get to that? So people who are listening have an appreciation for not only the impact of the current HUR, but also the fact that if the HUR is not extended in this session, that mandatory allocation goes away, does it not?
That is correct. So if it is not extended in this session, we'll go, I'm looking for the exact percentage.
It'll revert to a much lower number, right?
Yes. So we'll go from getting 12% or 12.2% of statewide allocation down to 9.5%. So that would be back at the level that we received in fiscal 24. And, as you're seeing here, even with the 12.2%, it's, we're not seeing significant growth because at a statewide level, the revenues are declining. And so as the city is advocating for, to maintain our higher share, the state is also grappling with what do we do with the fact that the revenue sources going into the highway user revenue fund are not sustainable based off of their current parameters.
And switching boxes for just a moment on the property tax, can you maybe follow up with us? And it'd be interesting for us, particularly in view of the commission's responsibility for development and similar activities, what the tax projections look like, in particular, understanding what the expected revenue is from the new vacants tax. And also on the other side, unfortunately, looking at decreased assessments because, particularly in the CBD, there's a lot of talk about large buildings that generate an enormous amount of tax revenue, which are being reassessed by appeal or otherwise at much lower numbers because of vacancy and such. So I presume there's some consolidated report that looks at the issue of property tax projections with some explanations and comments?
Certainly, and I have a little bit more detail in regards to property tax, but probably not at the level that you're looking for. And we can definitely follow up with that. One thing I will note that in the current fiscal year, in fiscal 26, we're realizing some rather large increases in the overall taxable base because we've had some really large properties come online. The Under Armour headquarters, the new T-Row building. But to your point, we are also seeing on the flip side, where folks have, moved from other facilities, major declines in those assessments. But we have that information. I can definitely provide that as a follow-up to the commission. And I do want to note that we, as you can see here, we're assuming about 9.2% assessment growth for residential property and a decline of just under 1% for the commercial piece. We received the updated assessment information from the state over the holidays, and we're working on updating this projection now. And I'll circle back with you to give you an updated synopsis based off of our updated projections. The piece with the vacants tax, so fiscal 27 will be the first year where the city is enforcing the split rate for any property that has a vacant building notice. And essentially what that means is if you have a vacant building notice on your property, your property taxes are going to be 3 times the current rate. We have been spending a lot of time studying the other jurisdictions to understand what the actual collection rate is on those properties. The intent of that legislation was never to be a revenue driver, but just to change behavior when it comes to those properties. So we're taking a rather conservative approach with how we budget revenue from that source in FY27. Again, we don't want to realize a ton of revenue from that. We want to see people, convert those properties back into useful use. And so we're assuming about a 50% collection rate from those properties. But again, it's really, we have, kind of a wait and see in terms of what that higher rate is going to do to the behavior of those property owners. Next up, I just want to spend a minute talking about income tax because this is one, that we are closely monitoring as it relates to the impact of changes in the federal workforce and what that will mean for the city's income tax revenue. This is our second largest revenue stream behind the property tax, and it's been one of the strongest when we look back over the last 10 years. And so we are assuming that it will grow by almost 20%, or that it will represent almost 20% of general fund revenue in FY27, and that it will be up by about 5.4%. One of the things I want to note is that this is based off of a flat 3.2% tax rate across all city residents. In last year's General Assembly session, they did pass legislation allowing local jurisdictions to increase this rate to 3.3%. But our Mayor Scott opted not to exercise that authority as part of the FY26 budget. Part of what is helping us out here is that there continues to be this overall growth in the statewide cash that's available for the allocation from income tax. But there's also, in recent years, we've also received higher, what we call the unallocated disbursement. This is a one-time payment that the city gets in June. And what it is the state looks at all of the uncollected income tax receipts at the end of the fiscal year. And what they do is they allocate a portion of that out back to the local jurisdictions based off of a formula. And so we've, in FY25, that number came in significantly higher than we had seen in the last 10 years. And so we are projecting that number will be higher again in FY26. Switching gears and talking about expenditures, like many organizations that you all are familiar with, most of the pressure around our expenditure growth is coming from personnel costs for the city. So if we look, salary costs are growing by almost 5% year over year. And other personnel costs or the benefit costs for city employees are up by 7.5% or 7.4%. Many of the, our debt service costs are growing at about 0.5%, and our fleet and building costs are growing by 2.7%. Our funding for local schools has been a big focus in the operating budget over recent years, and as we've all acclimated to the implementation of the blueprint, that funding level has really sort of leveled off in recent years, and so we're projecting growth that is consistent with the last 2 years, and we're assuming that we would stay in the same tier as part of the state funding formula. We'll have the final information about what's going to happen with the city's schools contribution in the middle of this month. One of the things that we've been really focused on in the operating budget over the last 3 years is how the city eliminates vacant positions and how we increase staffing levels in city departments. And so this slide, the yellow line on this slide is showing you vacancy trends for our unsworn positions, and the white line is showing vacancy trends for our fire and police officers. And this is really important because what we know is that when we have a lot of vacant positions, we have a lot of overtime pressure in order to, through callback overtime that's needed in order to meet our daily minimum staffing. And so as our agencies are able to fill more positions, we're going to see more relief when it comes to overtime costs in those departments. And so what we saw from in October is that we had about a 16% decline in the overall number of vacancies. And we are hovering in the general fund at about a 15% vacancy rate. Now, our pre-COVID levels were hovering anywhere around 10, so we've still not gotten back to where we were before the pandemic, but we are definitely making a lot of progress. But one of the things that is really contributing to high growth on the expenditure side is what's happening with benefits. And so this slide here is just showing you the major cost drivers for the benefits that we provide for city employees. So the top green line, that would be the sworn pension system for our police and firefighters. The middle gray line, that's our medical insurance. The blue line towards the bottom, that is our civilian pension system. The light yellow line, that's our retiree health benefits that we provide for our retirees. And then the white line at the bottom is our other post-employment trust fund. But the big takeaway from this slide is that if you look at where the city's health insurance costs have gone over the last 5 years, is that this growth is really unsustainable. So we have seen that our medical insurance costs went from almost $93 million in the 22 budget to being projected at almost $143 million in the 27 budget. So that's 54% in 5 years. So what's happened is, as we've seen premiums increase, the city has borne the full share of that increase. We haven't shared in that cost with our employees. So as part of the 10-year plan, one of the things that we're examining is how are our benefit plans structured, and do we need to make any modifications in order to ensure that we're able to fund city services. We also have a number of agency-specific cost pressures that we're dealing with on the operating side. We have new costs for a new location for the Board of Elections. For the Department of Housing, there's additional operating costs to support the non-contiguous TIF. We continue to see additional IT costs in BSIT, and that's related to the ongoing subscription costs for new systems that are implemented as part of the capital budget. The Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, we continue to see additional costs associated with our shelters, and so those are projected to grow by almost $4 million next year. For the police department, we need to renegotiate the contract for their body-worn camera program, and that, conservatively is at $6 million growth year over year. And the Rec and Parks, in Rec and Parks, we have 2 rec centers that are being renovated that will come back online. The new costs of that are projected to be about $1.4 million. And in the Transportation Department, we are working to update the snow budget to make sure it reflects the current delivery model. We estimate conservatively that's about a $2.7 million increase.
Laura, the Board of Elections, is that net new cost?
Yes. Yes.
And they're moving out of
They're
Benton?
they're moving out of their current location and trying to identify a new location. There's been one location that they've been very focused on for the last couple of years. They're continuing to work with the real estate team in the comptroller's office to find the right location. Their ultimate goal is to be able to look for a consolidated location that can be both their warehouse and their office and their training facility.
Well, again, we could go down the rabbit hole in any of these, and I promise not to, but it seems like a big number, and don't we have a lot of surplus property?
It is a big number, and that's why that's why we've not signed a new lease. It's because we've been continuing to look for the right location that meets the Board of Elections needs, but also is a realistic budget number as well. So just want to give a little bit of a flavor of the overall timeline associated with the city's operating budget and how it comes together with the capital. So the operating budget requests were solicited from agencies between October and December. And so as we've moved into January, my team is now working with each agency individually to review their proposed budget, discuss any of the major decision points and trade-offs reflected in their proposals. And then in February, my team and I will be presenting our budget recommendations to the mayor and his senior team as he works to prepare a balanced spending plan. Over the course of March, we'll work on packaging all of the materials, and that's when the operating budget and capital budget come together as the complete package that gets introduced to the Board of Estimates at the beginning of April. And then the board will hold their hearing and their taxpayer night to deliberate the budget before voting on the proposed ordinance of estimates in early May. And the full budget will get introduced to the City Council on May 11th. They will hold their hearings in late May, and they must act on the budget no later than June 26th. So with that, it looks like we're 2 minutes before DGS, but I would be happy to take any other questions.
Fellow commissioners, questions for the budget for Laura? Mr. McCoach?
Laura, I guess I want to confirm with you, capital projects are scoped and budgeted by each agency, is that correct?
That is correct.
And is there a standardized methodology for that process of defining what we think something's going to cost, our escalation, and contingencies? Is that something that all agencies do in the same manner?
No, and I would defer to Sarah to talk a little bit more about the direct guidance that's given to agencies in terms of how to build their capital budgets. But, under the current process, each agency is allowed to take their own approach, and that I would, reforming that approach is one of those things that I would sort of encapsulate it as part of those process reforms that are coupled together with the strategy to grow the size of the capital budget.
We see many biweekly changes to the CIP. And you think 1.7 million is a lot of money for a lease. The changes that we see in the CIP are enormous by comparison. And it seems to me that there maybe needs to be a way to confirm, to validate our pre-construction estimates.
Yeah, that's right. So prior to being in my current role with the city, I was working in Wisconsin as the capital budget director for the state for their building program. And what we did as part of our budget guidance to city agencies was we broke down all of the different components of the project. So the design fees, the construction estimates, the commissioning, and the contingency. And we gave people different ratios that each of those components should represent. And then we had different tiers. So if you had like a small capital project, like, $1 million, or if you had a mid-sized project, let's say like 1.5 million to 10, it should be these ratios. But if you had a major capital project, 10 million plus, like here were your ratios. And I know that's one of the things that the planning team has been looking at, is how we bring that type of contingency. Because the other thing is, it's a challenge for you all as you guys look at these agency requests, when you have some agencies who are putting aside a contingency as part of the project budgets that they're submitting to you, and then you have other agencies that are not submitting any contingencies, and sort of making sure that you're looking at project budgets that are really apples to apples.
And it actually calls into question our credibility when we sit up here and we approve with 8 thumbs up a master plan. And then when we start to see as it's being executed, it's getting whittled away because the cost estimates associated, and that's happening in Druid Hill Park right now.
Yeah.
So, and, I think, over the course of these hearings with the different agencies, I'd have to drill down a bit and see how this is happening,
Yeah.
how budgets are established and confirmed.
Yeah. I think that's important.
As part of the guidance for FY27, we began to move in that direction. I think there's a lot further to go and to build on what Director Larson said. But we did ask agencies to provide cost estimates for projects. So you'll see in the CIP, there's both projects with a discrete beginning, middle, and end that are kind of built, and then there's ongoing programs. But for the projects, we asked agencies to submit a cost estimate and had it broken down into those components, and asked agencies to include contingency where they may not have been budgeting for that previously. At this point, we provided guidance on ratios, so they're not enforced, but we suggested, that you should have a minimum of a certain percentage and tell us why you're not including that if you're not including that minimum
I think we'll be learning
contingency.
over the
So,
next couple meetings.
so I think that will improve with things that are just being budgeted for FY27, but you'll continue to see those transfers for things that were budgeted in prior years. And it's even with that contingency, we know that cost estimates have just been escalating kind of beyond the ability for agencies to predict, but I think it will improve.
So New York City has an Office of Management and Budget, and they do pre-project scoping and estimating just to get a sort of a bracket around costs before it goes out to an internal review or a consultant. That's one way to approach it.
Yep.
I guess the question is, does DGS do that for other people's capital projects? And then who does that for DGS's projects? So there's a lot of unfounded criticism oftentimes of public sector capital costs. That would never cost that much if we did it in the private sector, without taking into account public policy issues, including procurement and including MBWB and all these valid public policy underpinnings that do tend to affect costs.
Yeah.
But the question is, with all of those constraints, what are we doing to try and provide the best possible advice? Is there a central function that says, a validator, as Commissioner McCoach suggests? So
Yeah, and I know Director Attila has spent a lot of time thinking about this with his team, and would be able to weigh in on that as he gives his presentation next up.
We'll give them a chance.
Yeah.
other questions for the Budget Director, colleagues? No, okay, well, yes, Commissioner Stevenson.
Just one clarifying question, thank you. About the vacant housing TIF. You mentioned the debt service, and at one point you mentioned the increase in, I think it was management costs. Mm-hmm. Are those costs associated with the TIF funded by the TIF revenue?
No, so the additional costs to support the vacant strategy that are, that we're incurring within the housing department, we're having to accommodate those in the general fund as part of housing's operating budget.
So understanding that the bond proceeds are specifically for the investment in the future development, but the bonds, we're already seeing increase in the general fund from past development, which is like what the bonds were based on, right? So
Yeah, so what essentially happened in practice was, the financial advisor for the project went through, all of the city's properties, and they pulled a universe of them out of the general fund in order to back the TIF issuance. And so what we'll see starting in the FY '27 budget is that we're going to see less property tax revenue in the general fund. We'll see the same property tax revenue in the general fund, but we're going to have a brand new expenditure to pay the debt service for that TIF. At the same time, in order to scale up and prepare to implement this initiative, the Department of Housing has identified a series of additional operating costs in order to staff the work. And as part of the capital stack that was put together, those sources were not available to cover those additional operating costs. And so we're having to work with housing to look for ways to accommodate those as part of the city's operating budget in the general fund.
So I guess my question is, and you're very close to it, thank you, the properties that were segregated out and that revenue is not going in the general fund, what is it used for?
The revenue from those properties is being used to pay the debt service for the TIF.
I assume
Okay, so that was
incremental,
my question.
the
Yeah.
incremental revenue,
Yeah.
not the baseline revenue.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and so do we know how that compares to the 7 million in debt service?
The properties that were identified represent that full 7 million that's needed. And so then any next round of properties that get redeveloped, they would be used to support like the next round of the issuance. But
Just the reason for my question is when we look at those costs associated with the program, the 7 million and I think it was less than $1 million on the other one, those are funded.
yes, but as we think about sort of our long-term strategies about growing the capital budget in general, we have to think about these things together, because if the plan is to continue to grow that vacants TIF, we have to think about what we're able to sustain in terms of additional geo borrowing, and can we support both? And ultimately, we're going to have to continue to evaluate those decisions together.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I know we're behind, and I apologize. We'll do our best. Sarah, we're going to hear from you next, correct?
If it's okay with the commission, I would recommend that we keep on schedule and move forward with DGS, and I can present at the end of the day if that would be all right.
Well, yes and no, because it is an important framework, isn't it, for the rest of the discussion? And I know I have some threshold questions that I think would be best asked of you at the beginning, frankly. So we can try and do that quickly, and I apologize, but... and Laura, are you and your team going to stay, assuming we go to planning next, are you staying through that or are you departing?
I can stay.
I just don't know whether some of my questions might require a tag team, and they won't take long, but.
Yeah,
So Sarah, I'm sorry, I just think we need to
No
to do it that way. And may I just say, Laura, in case I forget, as you're stepping down, I've had the privilege of working with your department with both finance and budget in a variety of capacities, and I just want to thank you for your commitment and your professionalism. I know that you personally have really made a difference in the city's budget, process and outcomes. So I just want to, on behalf of the commission, I just want to thank you, and hopefully you'll convey that to others in the department. Yeah.
All right. Let's see if this works. Interesting. Okay.
And you can do this, I mean, if you want to do it a little more briskly than you might, otherwise we can come back. And I'm sorry for the timing, but I just
No,
think.
that's quite all
I
right.
just think we need to do it in this order.
I don't think it is sharing correctly on WebEx. Ivor, is that correct? Or Caitlin? Let me try again. Oops.
see if I share the entire screen, if it will work. Wrong one. Okay. All right, I think we're good. Wanted to give a little bit of framework in terms of the guidance that we have provided to agencies for FY27 to 32 before you hear the presentations from agencies. So glad we can squeeze this in. I just wanted to quickly introduce our CIP team. Since we were before you last year, we have hired a CIP supervisor, Leah Dubatz, who's here, and then Eli Poussin is the department's data lead, but works very closely with the CIP team and has led the effort in putting together a lot of the reports that you're seeing. And then Shakia and Nelson, looks like Nelson may have stepped out, are our CIP analysts and work with the agencies listed here. I think at this point, everyone is familiar with kind of the distinction between the operating budget and capital budget, the examples of capital projects. So I'm going to go through these. I'm just going to kind of skip through these intro slides, but if you want to stop me, feel free. The Planning Commission, does have a charter responsibility to prepare a 6-year capital improvement program, and the first year of that becomes the capital component of the ordinance of estimates. So, as was described in the last presentation, the ordinance of estimates is where the operating budget and the capital budget come together. We do have a definition from the Board of Estimates for what a capital improvement is and what a capital improvement is not. So vehicular equipment, is not, by Baltimore City's definition, for example, not a capital project. This is a list of the agencies that participate in the capital budget. So whereas all city agencies participate in the operating budget, we have a limited list of agencies that participate in the capital budget process. The Department of General Services serves as the property manager, if you will, for many of our other agencies that do not participate directly in the process. But they only work on those projects. So to the previous question about are they reviewing cost estimates for other agencies, they're not reviewing estimates for public works or transportation or rec and parks. They're only looking at city office buildings such as the one we're in today, health centers, senior centers, fire stations, all of those. So I wanted to review the schedule that we have for the CIP process. We came before you in August to do a kickoff for FY27 and then provided agencies with the instructions in September. The agencies submitted their request to us in December, and we were able to publish those December 19th. So we're trying to increase our transparency, and so this is one of the ways that we're doing that, is providing the agency requests in advance of these hearings today so that people have a chance to review them in advance and can come prepared with any testimony at today's session and next week's session. We have briefings all day today and next week, and then in February, we will have a Planning Commission work session, February 26th. Again, prior to that, we are expecting to publish the recommendations that we'll be discussing at that work session so that people, again, have a chance to prepare. And then the voting session for Planning Commission is March 12th, followed by Board of Finance review, Board of Estimates review, and then ultimately the City Council votes on the first year of the 6-year program. We've put together a number of reports that are available on your WIC site. And I wanted to give a little bit of an orientation in terms of what you're looking at. So there is a report that is FY26 appropriations and FY27 to 32 agency requests, and it has 3 summary tables within it. The chair asked us yesterday to provide FY26 as context for the FY27 through 32 requests, so hopefully that is helpful so you can see kind of what was approved for FY26 next to those requests for FY27. So you'll see a summary by agency within that report. You'll see a summary by revenue category, and then you'll see, each individual project listed. We have another report that is very similar to the project summary by agency and project category in that it lists all of the projects, but that report also includes the revenue category for the requests so that you can see whether they're requesting general funds, geo bonds, or highway user revenue versus an external source such as state funds or federal funds, because we're really focused in making recommendations on those sources that we have more discretion over. So being able to see kind of the revenue category that's being requested is key. There is another report that's available, the agency request details. This is a 500-plus page report, so I would not recommend printing it out, but it is very helpful if you use Control F for find. You can search by keyword, you can search by the unique project number, so every project has a unique number, PRJ00. And so you can search as agencies are making their presentations. If you want to look up information about them, if you have that report open, you'll be able to look up details and ask them questions. So I would recommend having that open in the background. At the request of Commissioner Stevenson, we've developed a report that compares last year's approved program with this year's requests. And so that is available, and we will update that as we go through the process. And then new this year, we have a report that shows you the justification. So we asked agencies to identify what are the primary justifications for each of their requests. They could identify up to 3, and so you can see, is this request addressing health and safety? Is it addressing a legal mandate? Is it advancing equity? And so you'll be able to see that information as well. At the kickoff that we did with the Planning Commission in August, we identified a series of goals for making the capital improvement program more strategic and a series of goals for making the process, to do process improvements. And so I wanted to, before we hear from the agencies, give updates on kind of what we have done related to some of these goals. So one of the challenges that we face is that there are an enormous number of potential projects that agencies need to do and want to do, but we don't see all of those, right? Because those are not submitted as part of the process. We provide agencies with some structure for what they should submit so that we're not seeing lists that are far beyond what we could even begin to fund. So we provide target levels, and then they submit requests that are beyond what we're able to fund, and so we make recommendations from what they submit in terms of what we can actually fund. But that is looking at a limited set of things that have been submitted. And so what we are doing this year is really expanding kind of that visibility into more of those potential projects. So what you're seeing this year is the top priority projects from agencies that are being submitted, and those are in line with the funding levels that were programmed last year. So we're using last year's program as a starting point. We're not trying to start from scratch each year anymore. We're really using the 6-year program as the guide, and then updating that each year. But in terms of being able to see kind of what some of these other potential projects might be, so that we can consider whether they should be funded or not, and in case we have additional funds, we also gave agencies an opportunity to submit additional priorities. And so you can see just some excerpts here at the bottom of the screen from that project details report, where you can see, for DGS, some examples of projects that were submitted within their base budget,
And so, if we don't make any changes and if the funding all moves forward as expected, those could all be fully funded. And then we have a list of additional priorities. And so in order to fund these, we would either need to make some choices to fund these instead of something that's in the base budget, or we would need to have additional funds available, which I do expect we will have this year, but we'll need to make some choices there.
Sarah, can I, maybe it's a good time to ask you this question.
Yeah.
I didn't follow your advice, and I did print out the 500 some odd pages. I've not read the 500, but I've read samples of them. Regarding the additional priorities, I mean, I think that's that's another way of sort of saying, like, what else would, I mean, it's a good exercise. Mm-hmm. Are those intended to be, are they like in the on-deck circle? I mean, is that like, you would do those next, if you could move the funding line further down? And I understand that the first additional priority may not be the highest additional priority.
That's correct.
Right?
Those aren't in ranked order.
Right. So, but does that mean that we would likely see those? Let's assume we funded 100% of the 27 priorities, the main list, the project, whatever we're calling it. Does that mean that the additional priorities would sort of bump up theoretically or practically into next year's budget year?
So if we have additional funds available this year,
Right, you'll do some.
Then some of those may be funded this year.
Right.
Or we may choose to move forward things that an agency requested next year. One of the challenges with that is that some of those projects may need design first, so they're not ready to be funded this year. So these are things we do expect to have some additional funds. One-time general funds, and so we will be using these additional priorities as the basis for making those recommendations.
And the line, the base budget line that gets drawn,
Oh, we're seeing your on different screen on WebEx. That's it. Thank you.
that's based upon an allocation that either finance or planning has given to the agency. So basically, give us your priorities within the base budget total for 27, and is the base budget total given by year, meaning base budget for 27, 28, 29, through the CIP process?
The base budget is based on what was programmed last year. So the amount for FY27 for this cycle is what was approved for year 2 last year, when FY27 was the second year. So in that 6-year program last year, there was an amount for DGS for general obligation bonds, and the base budget matches that amount.
So it doesn't account for real-world changes up or down in the past year, which clearly there have been real-world changes, right? Up or down. I mean, that number was a projected number from a year ago.
The total general obligation bonds isn't going to change based on.
Right.
I'm not sure I'm following your question. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I'm just trying to, you approved the mayor and city council, board of estimates approved the 27 big giant column of numbers. And if you start with that number, not all those sources are going to stay exactly as they were. Isn't that so for the subsequent budget year?
So that is correct. Not all of those sources are going to stay the same, but the base budget is assuming as a starting point that the GO bonds, the general funds, and the highway user revenue are staying the same as what was programmed last year. And then if there are changes to those 3 sources, we will make those in the final recommendations. But the base budget is assuming that those 3 sources stay the same as what was programmed last year.
Right, but for our purposes, as we're evaluating base budget items and additional items, are we supposed to assume that there is exactly the amount to spend as the 27 CIP planning year showed at the end of last year's process?
When we present to you at the work session in February, we will provide you updates. So the GO bond number will stay the same, but the general funds and the highway user revenue may have changed. And so we will provide those final numbers
at the work session in February. Because they will not be the same exactly.
And we expect them to go up slightly based upon something you said earlier?
We expect the general funds to go up.
Okay. All right, I have some other, but please keep going. Thanks.
Sure. So one of the other goals that we set at the beginning of the process was to develop a set of priorities for city capital investments beyond the evaluation criteria. So you may remember a few years ago, we worked with the Planning Commission as well as some focus groups to develop evaluation criteria. But we really wanted to go beyond that to direct investment in the capital budget. And so this is kind of a first step towards what Director Keene was talking about at the beginning. And so working with the administration, we identified two sets of priorities for this cycle. One is the vacancy reduction priority geographies. And the other is state of good repair. So we asked agencies as they were putting together their requests to think about how they could support both of these priorities. And we'll be able to tell you, what type of investment is being recommended that aligns with these priorities as we bring you recommendations in February. Another goal that we set at the outset of the cycle was to develop a narrative around what the city is investing in. So obviously part of that narrative will be the priorities that I just spoke about a moment ago. But in addition to those two priorities, we can also provide some narrative now around project categories and around project justifications. So you will see as you look at the reports that they are organized now by project categories. So you're not just seeing a list of all of the projects by agency, but you can see, how much is an agency requesting for one of these categories, and we will be able to compare, investment over the years and talk about kind of the collective investment in the fire department, for example, or the collective investment in DPW facilities, which we weren't able to do before. We are also collecting information about project justifications. So this is one of the reports that you have available on Wix. We asked agencies, as I mentioned, to identify the top 3 justifications for their requests. So which of these items is a request addressing? Why are you asking for funds? You're asking for funds to meet one or more of these needs. And so we can talk about how we're making progress towards these and create that narrative now. Another goal was to increase community outreach. And so we have been doing information sessions around the city on a monthly basis. Councilman Bullock has been to a couple of them. Thank you. We have our another one coming up February 2nd at the Orleans branch. And so this has been a really great way to interact with residents, in their neighborhoods to be able to explain the CIP process and encourage them to participate in today's sessions and the rest of the process. As part of our efforts to increase transparency and improve reporting, we're making the distinction that I mentioned earlier between projects and programs. So within the capital improvement program, you will see requests for projects that have a discrete beginning and end. They have a defined location. They have a defined scope of work. Making improvements to this building would be an example of a project. And so for the projects, we're collecting a different set of information. We're collecting information by phase. So to understand, are they asking for funding for design right now? Are they asking for funding for construction? We're asking for cost estimates, and those are being broken down, as we discussed previously,
How much for pre-planning, how much for design, how much for construction, how much for contingency, how much for inspection, et cetera. And we're providing some of those ratios. We're asking for a schedule as well as a location. So that information is more available than it's ever been before. Not perfect, but more available than it's ever been before. And then there are other requests in the CIP that are for programs. So these are ongoing in nature. And the amount of work done really depends on how much funding is available. So if you think about street resurfacing, there's a request every single year for street resurfacing, and the Department of Transportation is able to do more lane miles or less lane miles, depending on the level of funding. And so we've asked agencies to provide information about the optimal level of funding for those programs, as well as tell us the planned locations, knowing that those are subject to change.
Sarah, real quick.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the agencies basically input that in the form of a database, so you can sort and slice and dice that however you want, right?
Yes. Okay. So I mentioned that Eli Poussin is our data lead assisting the CIP team. He actually created an app to collect all of this information. So that's really been great.
I don't think it's the same question, but when you start with the last year's approved numbers, is it a gross number, or the approved numbers all live in every little individual line that they lived in as approved, and we start from, can an agency come back to you and say, yeah, last year was 50 million, and it looked like this across 100 different projects or programs, but we're going to reallocate it in a different way. It's still 50 million, don't worry, but we've moved it around. Does that happen pretty regularly?
Yes. So the starting point, that 50 million is allocated into the individual line items. But yes, the agencies can move that around as long as it totals to that same amount. And you can see those differences in the report that compares what was approved last year versus what was requested this year. So you'll be able to see kind of how agencies moved things around. So the cost estimate for one project may have increased, and they had to request additional money, and so then maybe they had to deprioritize another project or make it wait another year.
So, and that's the report that the vice chair had asked you to
Yes.
do? So if you just scan that report, and it's a bunch of pluses and minuses, right?
Correct.
So a modest plus might mean, look, turns out we need more money. A modest minus, a little savings, but a significant minus might lead to a question. Well, is that no longer a priority? Did you decide you didn't need to do it? Is the asset, did you sell the asset? I don't know, whatever the...
It's a great basis for asking questions of the agencies today. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
And then just wanted to highlight a couple additional pieces of guidance that we gave to agencies. So as was mentioned previously, we are working with agencies to request full funding for design or full funding for construction in a single fiscal year, so that we're no longer spreading that out and collecting funds over a 5 or 6 year period, by which time the project costs 2 or 3 times as much. And so you'll see that reflected in the requests for the most part. And where you don't see that, those might be some questions to ask agencies. In particular, transportation, has had some challenges with that. Some of the other exceptions are kind of one-off situations that I think make sense. We also asked agencies that if you're requesting design funding early in the 6-year program, in year 1 or 2, then we should expect to see a request for construction funding. We want to make sure that we're including things in the pipeline so that we're not just thinking about design and then nowhere in the 6-year pipeline have we planned for, even if we don't know the exact number, planned for construction. And so for the most part, I think you'll see that is the case, but if you see exceptions, those are good questions to ask agencies. And then last but not least, we are continuing the guidance that any requests for state or federal grants for year 1, need to have funding awarded. And so we're following up on that, but just wanted to make you aware. This last slide, because we don't have a presentation for planning and mayoralty, I just included a list of all of the projects here. And maybe this is something that we could wait until the end because this isn't relevant to the other agencies.
All set?
Yes, that's-
Colleagues, questions of Sarah before we turn to DGS? Thank you. I have a couple. You answered many of them, and I promise these will be quick, but they mostly relate to, when I looked at the report, just questions I had about like format or data or what it was trying to. So let me see if I can pick out the ones that I think did not get answered. On these detail pages in the 500-plus report, there's a concept called target program funding level, which follows the little matrix. And I'm looking at, I don't know what format you have or if it can be displayed, but I'm looking
going
at
to try and pull up the report that you're looking at so I can follow along. Okay. Do you have a page number? To just
well, yeah, I mean, any page. Let's say page 21, for example.
Okay.
So you have 18,900,000 as the full CIP number, but a target program funding level below it of 32 million. In other cases, that number is identical, meaning the ultimate 2732 number and the target program funding level are identical. Here, obviously, it's almost a factor of 2. And I'm just wondering what that number means.
Okay, so the target program funding level, on the slides I called it optimal funding level. So this is for when it's a program as opposed to a project. We asked agencies to tell us what the optimal funding level would be. So we know we have limited funding and we can't necessarily, agencies aren't able to request the full amount they need to keep up with their infrastructure on an annual basis. And so we're trying to understand how much they would need to do that. And so I think these numbers need some additional work, but this is the data that was provided by agencies.
So what does that number mean to us? What are we supposed to do with that number?
I think that where they are so high like this one, that might be a good question to ask agencies.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Okay, well, we'll have to figure that out. There's also a line on all of these, you can just pick one, stay on that one if you like. Operating impact.
Yes.
Can you explain what operating impact is?
Yeah, so we asked agencies to identify if there would be an operating impact related to this capital improvement. So you heard the budget director mention some of those, where we build a new recreation center, we need to staff that recreation center. Where we expand the facilities we have for homeless services, we need to be able to staff those. In some cases, it may not be a new facility. It may be that we're reducing costs because we're making an improvement that eliminates a cost. But that's what that operating impact is. So for a lot of the ones in BSIT, as was previously mentioned, they may be bringing a new application online, and we're supporting the development of that application and the initial support for that application in the capital budget, but then it would transition, the annual fees would transition to the operating budget at a future point.
So I guess the question there, and it reminds me a little bit, the budget director will remember the mega ARPA discussions, which is, it's great to fund this, but if you fund it, then you have to sustain it forever, and we don't have forever, we just have the ARPA funds for upfront. So is there a link between these such that someone has said, if we give you this capital money, the operating impact is okay? Or are we like, well, we don't know, we'll figure it out later?
So I've been working with Sarah on that element of data from these requests as we review and evaluate. I would say one of the things that is important for this body and other policymakers to consider when working on the capital budget is we acknowledge and we accept that there's additional operating costs from these projects. I think that's fine. What we want to think about is how we stagger things. So like this project has a $3.2 million operating impact in the first year. which is significant. That's one that, I'm working with BSIT on to figure out, why is a $2 million capital investment resulting in $3.2 million of recurring new operating costs? But what we want to think about is making sure that not all of those new operating costs hit in the same budget year, so that we are smoothing those things out so that we don't have these big ups and downs that would cause us to have major shortfalls in any given year.
Well, sorry. I just think you have to give us some guidance. And the guidance might be, you're the capital budget people, we're the capital budget people. Just ignore the operating budget impact, and I'll be happy to ignore it. But I just need to understand whether I care that this thing has a $3.2 million operating budget impact in '27, or maybe in '27 and future years. If the answer is no, that's just there for reference, the operating budget people will take care of it, that's fine, but I don't want to be irresponsible.
What I can provide to the body is guidance of what would be appropriate to withstand in any one given fiscal year. So if you are contemplating, adjusting timing of various projects, for example, you could be mindful to say, like, okay, well, we're creeping up on our operating impact.
Yeah, I must say, honestly, I think that may be too much to expect from us, not from you.
But that's how we're looking at it.
In the sense that what I'm really looking for is someone to say, this is a perfectly nice looking capital budget request, and you may be inclined to approve it, but it's going to cause us a big operating budget problem. And I need almost more of an on-off switch, or a red, yellow, green. I can't imagine that we could go through every one of these items and assess whether there's a, how to deal with it. So it's either we'll ignore it, which is fine if you're okay with that, or tell us what to do. But when I see that number, it makes me ask that question.
Yes, and to your point, it is being evaluated, and so I think from the perspective of this body, I would handle it as informational.
Okay. All right, one last question, I promise, and I'm sorry, but I noticed in the detail that you have these nice, every one you've seen gets a nice page, but when you get to the additional projects, they don't get pages. I believe.
I don't think that's true.
Okay, I could be wrong, but I thought they didn't. I'm looking, BSIT comes first, so it was kind of easy to look at. But I thought when I got to the end of BSIT, the last BSIT detail, well, you can do it with me.
Upgrade speed and reliability of public safety communications is an additional priority in BSIT, and it has a page here.
Well, okay. Well, maybe it's just interspersed. Because on the summary page, I'm sorry, I know this is in the weeds, but I got to get it straight. On the summary page, the last base budget item is internet router refresh. And that is the last page of detail before you get to the mayor's office. So unless the ones that fall as additional priorities, and there are 3 or something for BSIT.
Not be in the same sequence as as the table.
Okay, I did not go back and look to see if they were, but you're saying there are pages, they're just not in sequence. Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, thanks.
Yep.
Sarah, thank you again for teeing this up, and if there are no other questions, we can turn to the agencies.